This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
We're back, and, we talked about the sound of freedom, and it's almost $150 million revenue records. Jim Caviezel doing a great job. That's into human trafficking and what's happened across America despicably. It's the FBI, it's the ATF, it's the Border Patrol, it's heroes in those law enforcement spaces that prevent this, that stop it. Guys like Steve Friend, who wrote a book, and he's my next guest, True Blue. He didn't have such a fun conclusion to his law enforcement. He was a suspended special agent and whistleblew because he wanted to expose the FBI's politicization and abuse against conservative America. And folks, Steve doesn't know my history, I don't think, but if you know my history, and his PR person doesn't know my history. They reached out to us because I have a talk show. But remember 10, 12 years ago? Remember Tommy Boy, a state representative, married to a state representative? Remember, 8 lawmakers, including our beloved U.S. Senator Ted Stevens? Our airport's named after him, big statue of him in the airport in Anchorage. Remember those indictments? Remember the trials? Remember my trial, which I ultimately lost? Remember Chad Joy, the FBI agent that whistle blew on his colleagues, Kepner and others, involved with my case? Redactions? Remember that? I remember that. And Chad quit. He left. We're not interviewing Chad. Steve's probably thinking, where's this going? Hey, if you want to talk about someone simpatico, not as a law enforcement officer, but as the target, my friend, Steve Friend, I feel you with empathy and sympathy. I was wearing a different hat at that time, but I want to hear your story. I was so excited when I heard you were willing to interview. How are you? Good morning. Let's get right into it. Tell me your story, brother.
Well, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I joined the FBI in 2014. I was a police officer before that, so I got a total of about 14 years when my career came to an abrupt end earlier this year. But joining the FBI was originally spent 7 years on Indian reservations in Iowa and Nebraska. Transferred to Florida in 2021 to work on child pornography and trafficking cases, but was voluntold to work on January 6 matters. And that was when I first became aware of how the FBI is departing from its rules and using my experience that I was very familiar with, having arrested about 150 violent criminals. But the FBI is juking the stats to manipulate the domestic terrorism stats using January 6th and taking one case and turning it into thousands of cases and spreading them around the country. And I was concerned that was jeopardizing even righteous cases because I've been in trial and I know the pitfalls that can ensue from that. And I was concerned in that regard. And I was also concerned because I was a SWAT team guy for 5 years, and we were sending SWAT to go arrest a gentleman who, while he was accused of a felony, had pledged to be cooperative with us, and we were going to send a tactical team up to his house to go do that. And I thought that presented an unnecessary risk to him and to us, and it was almost like being in the room the day before Waco, and everybody Monday morning quarterbacks Waco, and I said, well, look, I'm here on Saturday. And brought that concern to my supervisor and my executive management up the chain of command, and at every level, immediately I was told that I was risking my entire career by doing that. And I said, well, I have an oath of office. I have specific training on weaponization of this agency to be on the lookout for that. I went to the Holocaust Memorial as part of my training, and I'm throwing the flag. And they found a way to contrive a way to walk me out of the building and suspend my security clearance and put me into sort of a purgatory of unpaid indefinite suspension in order to remove me. I was a glitch in their system.
Wow. Back in 2014, there was an attorney who wrote a book, License to Lie. and I had her on my show, and we became not friends but acquaintances. And I'm looking her up now. It's sad how Wikipedia works. Sidney Powell is an American attorney, former federal prosecutor, and a conspiracy theorist. And then they go kind of bash her. Well, that book, License to Lie, covered stories of what you just alluded to, and stories like Ted Stevens here in Alaska. And she didn't cover you as premature to your event, but we're seeing this across the nation. By the way, folks, the last guy on earth that's anti-law enforcement is me, and probably Steve Friend the same. I think morale for conservative, patriotic law enforcement officers, cops, sheriffs, departments. In Alaska, we have state police, city police. We don't have counties. We have boroughs, and federal law enforcement the same. There's a frustration. So let me ask you, Steve. You can't speak for your colleagues; they're not on the show. But would you say that there is a partisanship, not just at the headshed level, but across America, and it needs to stop because that's suppressed morale of law enforcement officers? We could get into Black Lives Matter or the degradation of law enforcement's ability. But from federal to state to city, I don't see a lot of recruitment because of stories like yours, and it's very disappointing for American justice.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the folks that have ascended the ladder into management within federal law enforcement are incredibly left-leaning, and that's a problem because they are using the little dirty secret in the FBI and other agencies is that there is a quota system, and they're doing the bidding of whoever's in charge, and right now it's a very left-leaning government, and there is a quota system, and they have deployed the tools and the weapons at the fingertips of the FBI to go after the political enemies of a Biden administration and label them as domestic terrorists or white supremacists or anti-government extremists. And as a result of that, they are deeming themselves to be successful and getting an enhanced budget because they hit their numbers this year and they've gotten a boondoggle with January 6th and other issues, and they've worked smarter and not harder. And the grossest part is the senior executives within the FBI get financially compensated. They get bonuses because they hit their quota system. And I think as a result of that, the morale has just been driven through the floor from the rank and file who really signed up to do the work that we know from popular culture. And, look, I saw Point Break. Being an FBI agent looked like a really fun job. It was something I always endeavored to do. And I was not in the business of putting a ISIS case on an individual because we needed to have an ISIS case in my office because we were short by that one case, which actually did happen to me.
Absolutely. By the way, I reference Sound of Freedom. Have you seen that movie? What an inspiration. I would think that would be a catalyst to recruitment. Folks working in federal, state, city law enforcement agencies to help root out what you have tried to do, to stop cartels, to stop human trafficking. I mean, the gig, the job in and of itself is very noble, and I don't think you're saying anything otherwise.
I agree. I think it's an incredibly important movie because hopefully it galvanizes some attention towards this, which has sort of been kept in the corner and put under the rug. We don't want to think about it because it's just so awful and gross. And it's one of the few violations in law enforcement that you can beg out of because it is just so hard on you psychologically. But my pushback to that is if you swear an oath and when you wear a gun and badge, you have obviously made a decision that you're going to potentially lay down your life or take a life. I think we need to have an expectation in law enforcement that you should be able to take on those cases. And if you're not unwilling to do that, then perhaps the entire profession might not be for you, because I don't know anybody, regardless of where your political ideology falls, who wants to see children hurt, unless, I guess, of course, that you make a movie about it and you're outwardly conservative and Christian, then I guess you want to suppress that as our mainstream media has done.
Yeah, it's so true. By the way, do you know why I'm talking to our audience, Sidney Powell, Rudolph Giuliani, John Eastman, Jeffrey Clark, Sidney Powell, they're 4 of the 6 unnamed and uncharged co-conspirators in this latest Trump indictment regarding January 6th. When we come back, I want to talk about why you've affiliated, Steve, with the Center for Renewing America. And folks, you can go to americarenewing.com. Steve is a senior fellow with that organization, and he's written a book. Well, again, we'll tell you how you can purchase the book through Amazon, True Blue. Stay with us. More from Steve Friend, his journey, and what he's advocating prospectively in Congress. Stick with us. Tom Anderson Show.
This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
We're back with Steve Friend, and I was talking on the break, I'll admit, about time at Sheridan and 5,000 plus letters and the frustrations where you see cases implode because of whistleblowing. This isn't even Steve Friend's story, it's mine. But I'm poaching on the interview to talk about me and talk about my dad. You folks know, longest, youngest, telling Steve, state trooper colonel in Alaska's history, got the law enforcement of the decade, millennia award. My dad, Tom Anderson Sr., his disgust with how the FBI and federal government and Department of Justice handled the cases against me, against Ted Stevens. And Steve, you said, I'm familiar, duh. True Blue, my service with the Center for Renewing America. I get it, Tom. That's my whole story. Different story, but same one. And you were talking about a TV show.
Yeah, it's a conversation I've had with some other whistleblowers about the difference between the FBI and regular police work. And we kind of came to the conclusion that the FBI is law enforcement cosplay. They're out there. They have their gun and their badge when they need it to put on display, sort of as a trophy. But for the most part, it's people in cubicles, and they're not really interested in getting their shoes dirty. So it was always my prime directive in the time that I had in the FBI to work with the locals, and I think that I attribute that to the fact that I was a local at some point, and I know that those guys are the ones that are out there putting the bad guys away and really know what the needs are for their communities, whereas the federal agencies are just kind of answering to a quota from headquarters, and they're going about their way, and it goes back to the Die Hard scene where it's Agent Johnson, no relation. They kind of come in at big time and try to steal big time cases and not really do a whole heck of a lot of the work.
When you talk about and delineate and highlight assiduously, you go through all these problems and experiences that you suffered and were a victim of. You're not to put words in your mouth, but you're not talking about all federal law enforcement, nor are you speaking for every single FBI agent, because some of them have as much passion and conviction, no pun intended, and heart and soul in their public safety and first responder and law enforcement service as you do and did. Is that fair? Because there's a lot of good FBI agents and cops and federal agents out there. You're not knocking the agency as much as personalities and partisanship. Is that fair?
I think it's fair. I'm still friends with a fair amount of people that are still in the agency. You always have to issue the qualifier of the good men and women of the FBI. I think that they are there, but unfortunately, it's a combination of people who are afraid to come forward with their concerns because they see how the FBI just turns and circles the wagons and puts all of its focus on discrediting and putting you through the ringer if you come forward with a legitimate concern. And what gets lost in that is that I've never been accused of being wrong. And I don't need to be right. I just need to be reasonable. And I think I've articulated a very reasonable concern that I brought forward with the utmost sincerity and was willing to go back to work for the FBI. And as a result of me coming forward just with that to my frontline supervisor was not only suspended and denied the opportunity to get outside pay, but I was also had my medical information leaked to the New York Times, and I was issued an illegal gag order that attempt to prevent me from speaking to an attorney. The FBI tried to redact significant portions of the book that I wrote and did not profit from. It's just completely just been put out. I didn't get an advance or anything like that. My wife lost her job suspiciously, and her social media accounts were taken down without her doing anything actively on them. So it was just a long train of usurpations that we suffered, and I think people don't want to have to go through that. But
it's pretty scary. We're talking with Steve Friend, author of True Blue, and, you know, he has gone through a journey. I'm surprised you're as uplifted and positive as you are. He was a former FBI agent. I remember when I was going through my trial, my wife, very suspicious, brilliant gal, retired as a state senator, ex-wife now, I should say, but dear friend. We have a child together, and Liesel. And I remember Liesel saw behind our home in South Anchorage a trailer when we were planning our trial tactics and strategy. And she said, why is there a grass flower garden behind our house and all of a sudden a trailer there? She said, I think we're being monitored. I said, what? That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. And then after I lost, I didn't know her, but an owner of a spa, downtown Lure Day Spa in Anchorage, she called us and said, I have wept for you. I know you have a baby back then. Grayson was a kid, little youngster, little one. And she said, I'm going to give you, because you know what was going to happen to me, where I was headed to serve my sentence. She said, I'm going to give you a spa. And I didn't want it. I was sad and sick. She said, nope. And guess what? Allure is right next to the FBI headquarters of Alaska. So we drive to it. I say, okay, I'll go. I've never had a massage, but I'll go. Liesel did something. We drive, and Liesel says, look, they have a caged fence where agents park, and they also park inside and underneath the building, too. There was that trailer. And I was just, wow, they were monitoring us, which is illegal. And so you may say that's an inconsequential story, but it wasn't to me. And crap like that makes you suspicious. I can't get off the interview without talking with Steve Friend about the Center for Renewing America. Quickly, how did you connect with them, and what do they do? And as a senior fellow, what do you do in connection with them?
Well, thank you. So AmericaRenewing.com, there was an opening for a fellowship to advise on domestic intelligence and domestic security services. So they fought very hard to get this weaponization committee up and stood up within the Judiciary Committee in Congress. And we are working to advise that committee on investigating the FBI. So I kind of fit the bill pretty well for them. And we're also presenting some things publicly that folks don't know a lot about. So I drafted some policy proposals, a budget, recommendations to defund significant portions of the FBI, especially the intelligence gathering apparatus that exists, and then also the top 10 systemic problems that exist within the FBI, to include this quota system and the growing national security branch that is targeting conservative Americans. So I think that is information that is vital to share. And then Center for Renewing America doesn't just focus on the malfeasance by the FBI. It's border-related activities, out-of-control, woke and weaponized government. So it spans the gauntlet, and they provide a lot of information out there. So I would encourage folks to look at the website and see the information we're bringing forward, because we do have some allies in the Congress that are trying to implement our recommendations.
And if they went and they looked at your objectives, what can they do? Is it purely getting a hold of respective congressional members? Because we'll make a YouTube video of this, and others in lower 48, Hawaii, will listen as well. What will that do? Because you're not purely looking at just defunding the FBI. We need the FBI. We need good agents that can root out criminals and prevent crime and uphold justice and law and order. So I would assume the layers of what the voter can do is to make sure things get done and the right lawmakers that support your agenda are elected next year.
Yeah, I think that electorally that's important, and I also think just getting the information to these guys, because they're inundated with a lot of stuff. They're spread pretty thin. I don't think they consider possible solutions like I've come up with, where we disarm the FBI and make them unarmed investigators like they originally were intended to be, and then empower local law enforcement. So it's not defunding the police, it's empowering locals and allowing those guys to be federally deputized, so that it provides a bulwark against an out-of-control federal government, because they're going to need to get the consent of a local sheriff or a police department in order to have an investigation and to, in effect, an arrest. And those sorts of solutions are out-of-the-box thinking that I think too many of our elected Republicans are just get caught up with, well, you know, the FBI good because its police are good, and I'm not a defund the police guy, and I will sign off on enhanced budgets for it.
Yeah, because that was my visceral reaction. Even with my gauntlet and journey, I still appreciate the FBI, all federal law enforcement. I'm very pro-cop, not just because of my dad, because I'm a patriot. I love America. I want to see law enforcement funded appropriately, and I want them to be ethical and have integrity. But I think you're weaving through this narrative the problems and the examples of where we've fallen in law enforcement. What would you leave Alaskans and the nation with as we conclude the interview? I assume buy your book and follow Center for Renewing America and keep in touch with you, I assume.
Yes, sir. You can pick up a copy. It's pinned on my social media at RealCFriend. And you can follow AmericaRenewing.com to learn about everything we're doing there. And I appreciate all the support that everybody, especially up there in Alaska, has given me. I've gotten to talk to several people that live up there, and they've been great.
True Blue is his book. Center for Renewing America is his organization. Steve, thanks for your time. Folks, follow us on YouTube, Tom Anderson Show, and of course online, TomAndersonShow.com.